Good morning. I'm excited about today's reading. Today's reading comes from Susan Taylor's book, In the Spirit, a compilation or a collection of her inspirational writings when she was the editor-in-chief of Essence magazine for like decades, right? And I was not a subscriber to Essence, couldn't afford it back in the day. But whenever I came across the magazine, I always read, like everyone else, right? Always looked forward to, always read her editorials, which were dripping in Black woman spirituality, right? And I always thought, how is this in this collection of capitalism, with all the fashion and all of the beauty and makeup and entertainment stories and all of that, along with all the other things, the financial tips and stuff, what you have in a magazine. But in the midst of all of that was this oasis of thick spirituality. And so when she came out with this book, that was a collection, I guess, of the best or the most, I don't know how they chose which ones would go in the book. But anyway, I wanted to get the book. But one morning on my way to work, I heard an announcement on the radio that she was going to be at some hot spot in Atlanta for a book signing that evening. And something within me knew I had to be there that night. And I was a young mother. My daughter, gosh, I don't even know how old she was at the time, maybe 6 months or so. No, she had to be a little older than that. Maybe she was closer to a year old. I called my former husband at the time and I told him I needed to go to this thing. And I hesitated to call him and tell him that because he didn't move in spontaneity that well like that, right? Because that meant he had to pick up my daughter. It must have been my day to pick her up. It meant he had to pick her up, take care of her, all this other kind of stuff. But I went through all of that with him because I knew I had to be there. And money was tight, so tight in those days that buying a book was a big purchase. And so I figured it out so I could buy the book and get her to sign it. And I just remember being enraptured and in awe as I sat in the audience to listen to her talk and to have to experience her reading excerpts from her book. I had not returned to the church or even to a regular ritual of spirituality at that time. But her book was the beginning of my return. I was reading her book and the autobiography of Malcolm X for the first time concurrently. And I took notes with her book. If I remember correctly, reading the chapters in her book were like my morning meditations, and I would write my thoughts down. I've always journaled since I was like 10. I began writing in a diary, and then, of course, when I became older, it became a journal and not a diary. But I wrote down my reflections and my thoughts of each chapter after I'd finished reading it. And so when I picked this book off the shelf, my notes are still tucked away within the chapters of the book. So I get to relive, revisit me in my 20s when this was happening. A young wife, a young mother, and someone that was on the precipice of a lot of change that would be the catalysts for who I am today. And so I share all of this because we're talking about the years in between in my 20s and my current reality of developing a spirituality that people ask me about. How do you know this? How do you do this? How did you come here? How did you get here? And so much has happened in the decades between my 20s and now that in my spontaneous mind, I'm unable to really put my finger on what exactly I did, other than saying like meditation and, those kinds of things, Bible study and all other exploring and learning about other forms of spirituality outside of Christianity. But going back to this book lets me know that this was one of the specific things that I could put my finger on to say that this was a significant part of my spirituality as an adult. And so I share it with you. And I'm not going to read my notes. I'm going to read the first chapter of the book, which is entitled Living from Within. And so as I record this, we, of course, across the globe are dealing with the coronavirus. And in the United States, grappling with what it means to stay in place. I think that's what they call it. To self-isolate, to social distance. And some of us are in actual quarantine. And some of us are in ICU, fighting for our lives, fighting to breathe. And these are things that do not escape my attention to its connection to other things. I think about Michael Brown, who so we widely know that he was struggling to breathe too, even before the police attacked him. But his words were, "I can't breathe," right? So nothing that we do is without some kind of consequence, some kind of effect from the cause. I'm going down a rabbit hole, so let me regroup. Living from within. So I brought all of what we're experiencing right now up to say that part of our struggle in self-isolation and so on and so forth is that we live from without. And when that outward world is taken from us in some way, we struggle. And I tend to shy away from saying something is better than something else. But if we are able to live from within, that within goes with us wherever we are. And so whatever our outward circumstances are, when we live from within, we can be okay wherever we are, existentially. So I'll share my reflections from decades ago, and then I'll read the chapter. So my reflections begin with recalling the first time I ever experienced the power of prayer and inward reflection, and the consequenting. I keep wanting to say that. I don't know if that's a word. Consequential. There you go. And the consequential power that comes from a discipline of practicing these things daily. I was 10 years old, and my 5th grade class had been given rosaries, which was the practice at my Catholic school. In 5th grade, I wasn't Catholic, so I'm not sure what happened, like at First Communion or at what do you call it? What is it? Confirmation. Maybe that's when Catholic children would get their rosaries. Nevertheless, in the school, 5th graders would get our own rosaries blessed by the priest and so on and so forth, coincided with our religion classes. And we were supposed to begin praying the rosary before bed every night. That was daunting. That was like 6 Lord's Prayers, 6 I say glory bees, but there's a doxologies, maybe, is that the word? And 53 Hail Marys in one sitting. And I never made it through the entire thing. I would always fall asleep, although I would fall into a very peaceful, wonderful sleep and have wonderful dreams and such. And I remember finally deciding to confess to Sister Christine that I did not stay awake, and she chuckled and told me she would fall asleep praying the rosary as well, which made me feel a whole lot better. She was also the nun who told us, only a few of us, she told that Noah may never have existed, which was the beginning of understanding what the Bible really has within its pages. Let's see, what else did I write? So I fell away from that practice, and as I started to move through adolescence and my teenage years and my young adult years in college, never really acquired a regular spiritual practice again. So in my 20s here, like I said, being a young wife and a young mother, starting to feel like I needed to, maybe this is what millennials call adulting. I started to feel a need of getting a hold of myself, right? And to add some spiritual structure and discipline to my life, following the promptings within me to even go to Susan Taylor's reading, to get her book, to begin to read it and reflect on it. And this was a part of two things happening in my life at that time. It was about to fall apart, and these spiritual practices that I was putting in place and doing them regularly, these were added planks to the foundation of who I've become today. So I wrote about how it was a struggle for me to get up before my husband and my daughter. My husband was an early riser. I was not. But if I did not get up before him, his needs, his conversation, nothing necessarily heavy, but it began to influence my day. And of course, my daughter's needs influenced my day. But if I got up before them and spent time with me, I influenced my day, right? And he had given me apparently some things that were to help me in my alone time. He had given me this set of bubble bath and scented soap and candles, all that kind of stuff, for me to do that. So in that way, he was supporting what I said I needed. I wrote that my days progress much better when I give to me first, or close to it. I am not bothered by as many occurrences. Traffic looks less crowded, and my family's smiles shine much brighter. I wrote that year I would be taking steps to be and to develop me, in capital letters, me. And I said that so far the bathing necessities that my husband had given me for my ritual were not going to waste. And that so far I am living from within. Here's the chapter. There are glorious times in our lives when we experience the peace we are seeking, when we surrender our burdens to God, put our faith in God's love, and feel the freedom of that sweet communion. I know that you too have felt the comfort of the presence, the security we have when focused inward through prayer or meditation, the sense of inner peace we experience listening to a moving sermon or inspirational tape, or reading comforting words of wisdom in a spiritual book. During these times of bliss, we often declare, "I've got it. I have the key." We believe we've finally found our inner peace, that absolute answer we've been searching for. But if your experience is in any way like mine, after a few months, weeks, or sometimes just hours, you've lost it again. You're back in the fray, feeling overwhelmed by the pressures and demands of your life. Focusing inward through prayer, meditation, or any spiritual communion makes us feel centered and calm. We feel an inner serenity. We are one with God. But why is it so difficult to maintain that awareness, to live with it? My life feels anchored and peaceful when I'm enjoying sunrise meditations, my fragrant candlelit baths, and spiritual readings and tapes. But little by little, the rituals that sustain me are pushed aside as more and more of my time and attention are demanded by the world. Although getting it can happen in a flash, keeping the awareness of God's presence within and the peace of mind this truth gives us is never easy. Unfortunately, as the world calls us, we abandon the important rituals that nourish us, that keep us healthy and sane. The regular visits to the gym go. We have no time to spare for daily meditation, no time to mend the spirit, no time for fun, no time to play. We're overextended. We're committed to everyone except ourselves. So we feel evil and tired. We're cranky and fretful. We've given all our stuff away. Being the guardian of our inner life must become our highest priority. We must never allow people, institutions, or social tradition to speak to us so loudly that we cannot hear ourselves. When you don't take quiet time to listen inwardly, you look outside yourself for salvation and definition. By ignoring your own spiritual bidding, you dishonor yourself and risk becoming a pain-filled imposter as you give way to the pressures in your environment. You may betray yourself and settle for a relationship without intimacy or mutual support, the very things you need most, because you fear being alone and desperately want to be part of a couple. Or you may find yourself anchored to a bustling city when your spirit requires the respite of birds and trees. Or working for a company half your life, unappreciated and undercompensated, when all along your spirit has been whispering, start a business of your own. When we don't nourish spirit in us, we become estranged from ourselves and may try to satisfy our natural hunger for communion in harmful ways. There are invitations all around us to use food and drink, and I say sex, and other life-threatening addictions to pleasure ourselves. We can't benefit from our inner wisdom if we don't take time to listen inwardly. The wise voice at the center of our being where spirit lives is never silent, thank God. Life is first an inner experience. All the peace and security we are seeking is within us. Love, wisdom, and strength and beauty are the primary attributes of spirit, the unchanging and fundamental core of our being. Love, wisdom, strength, and beauty are the very substance of who we are. Just as water cannot be separated from a wave, we cannot be separated from our essence, our divinity. We are never without God. But without regular spiritual communion, we forget about our divine nature. We lose the awareness of our spiritual power, and ours becomes a halting, feeble existence because we are living without the benefit of our greatest strength. If we sincerely want harmony, peace, and joy in our lives, we can have them, but we must be willing to do the work. We must make maintaining an awareness of our spiritual nature first in our lives. Our inner world is the architect of our external world. We don't lose faith in the goodness of life because we are angry and depressed. Rather, we become angry and depressed because we lose faith in the goodness of life. We aren't happy because we are healthy. We're healthy because we are happy. With our minds, we are creating our days. By our choices, we are building either the harmony or the pain we experience. The life you are living reflects the life you have already established inside. As we acquire and assimilate spiritual knowledge, we liberate ourselves. The imaginary boundary between our inner and outer lives that is drawn as we leave childhood and begin looking outside ourselves for definition is dissolved. Immediate and profound changes occur in every area of our lives as we make learning and applying spiritual insights first in importance. We begin to see that the inner and the outer are the same. We realize that continuous communion with God is the only way to remain conscious of our spiritual nature in the face of our constant daily pressures. When we are conscious of our divinity, we catch the light. We see the truth. We have the wisdom, courage, and stamina to endure, to overcome, and succeed. As we develop our latent spiritual power, we become the masters of our own lives, and we are able to create lifelines for our people, for our sisters and brothers who are drowning. When we are living from within, we recognize the potential for spiritual growth in each moment. Living in the Spirit isn't complicated, but it does require continual commitment and devotion. Everything necessary to your wholeness is within you. You do not need to go to a house of prayer or a mountaintop retreat to commune with God. You do not have to move a muscle. Wherever you are is where God is. You cannot always physically remove yourself from the madness of the world for prayer and meditation, but you can always draw upon your inner wisdom anytime, any place. You can listen inwardly even in a crowded room. Even in the middle of an argument, you can heed your higher self and rise above the ego's need to be right and make the other person wrong. During any challenge or conflict, you can decide to give way to love. You can always smile toward your center where truth and wisdom await you and say to the Holy Spirit, I surrender. Living from within is an exercise in self-awareness. It requires consistency in exploring the dynamics of your life, being constantly aware of your feelings, attitudes, habits, and motives. As you watch yourself faithfully, you become more aware of what triggers your happy and conflicting emotions, your positive and negative impulses. You become alert to the things that are good for your body and to those that cause it harm. You develop an awareness of the people and things that provoke frustration and anger in you and those that motivate and inspire you to feel loving and calm. Self-awareness puts you in control of yourself so that you no longer simply react to life, but instead think critically about what's best for you and consciously decide how you want to be. When we are focused inward and make conscious decisions based on what makes us feel whole, we grow stronger in mind, body, and spirit. The search for yourself is your life's purpose. To know yourself is to know the power of God within you. We are here to discover our truth and to make our unique contribution to life. The universe is supporting us, and Spirit wants us to give something back to help and heal others. But first, the healing must begin within us. We must learn to trust the mystic within. We must learn to recognize and respect God within ourselves. You and I know these truths. We know the way. Our challenge is to close the book, to leave the religious service, to turn off the tape, and practice living the message. The more we practice living from within, listening and talking to God throughout each day, the more conscious we become of God's indwelling presence, the more receptive our minds and hearts become to the wisdom of Spirit. Then we have deeper insight and a greater understanding of life. Then our duties, cares, and worries become our opportunities for growth, and our burdens are made lighter. Just a few points that I caught as I read this. She wrote about feeling like, or rather, she wrote about creating lifelines for people who are drowning. And that particularly strikes me right now because people who have survived COVID-19 talk about feeling like they were drowning. And remember, I said that, and she talks about living, inward and such in this chapter, obviously. And the problem that happens when we live from without, and how I connect that to the pandemic that we are living through right now. There's a connection there. The other thing is, I smile at my young self, because at the time I did not understand what triggers were. And I wrote in the margins to explore triggers. I, of course, understand that a lot better these days from my own personal experience and my own study and training. I think what happened with me is that I actually took this wisdom, these prophetic words to heart. And though I struggled to make it happen, I did make it happen. I did develop a spiritual discipline and ritual that was consistent and that made all the difference in my world. So I pray the same for you. That whatever spiritual ritual or discipline you are led to develop for yourself, I pray that you are able to do it consistently, to build upon it, to stick with it, to do the work, so that your living within becomes your living without. Amen and ashe, and may it be so for you this day.